Dedicated to the survival of American democracy in an increasingly dangerous world, this is Secure Freedom Radio with Frank Gaffney, acted as Assistant Secretary of Defense for International Security Policy under President Ronald Reagan, founder and president of the Center for Security Policy in Washington, D.C., the go-to man for defense and foreign policy issues, joined by the greatest minds in the security policy business, the special forces in the war of ideas at Secure Freedom Radio with Frank Gaffney.
Welcome to Secure Freedom Radio. This is Frank Gaffney, your host and guide for what I think of as an intelligence briefing on the war for the free world. As in any war, we must know our enemies, especially adherents to the totalitarian Islamic ideology known as Sharia, if we are to counter them and preserve our country and constitution, which they explicitly seek to destroy. Since before 9/11, we at the Center for Security Policy have worked to raise awareness of this threat by producing a dozen books, hundreds of videos, and innumerable articles, op-ed pieces, and interviews. In December, I was asked for such an interview by Matthew Rosenberg of the New York Times. I agreed, even though I knew that the so-called Gray Lady has been reduced to a house organ for the hard left, its political machine, the Democratic Party, and such radicals' unlikely allies, Sharia supremacists, like the Muslim Brotherhood. I expected Rosenberg to perpetuate the Times patron's false narrative that I am a hater and Islamophobe, so I secured his permission to record what turned out to be several conversations. Consequently, I was prepared when he smeared me on February 2nd in a lengthy article on the Times front page under the headline, quote, "A sinister perception of Islam now steers the White House," unquote. The article was principally a hit piece against President Trump. It also castigated his National Security Advisor Michael Flynn and his chief strategist Stephen Bannon. Then, Rosenberg threw in at the article's end 5 paragraphs and a picture with a caption that defamed me. Specifically, the article and caption claimed respectively that I viewed, quote, Islam, unquote, and, quote, Muslims, unquote, as, quote, termites that hollow out the structure of the civil society and other institutions for the purpose of creating conditions under which the jihad will succeed, unquote. Now, taking quotes out of context is a favorite trick of agenda-driven journalists, but that required Matt Rosenberg to distort about 2.5 hours of conversation in which I repeatedly explained that my focus is on countering the stealthy jihad of the Muslim Brotherhood and its ilk, and applauding Muslims who reject their toxic totalitarian ideology. Listen to a couple of illustrative clips the Times failed to acknowledge so as to misrepresent my views, and, it would appear, help the Brotherhood suppress our exposés and warnings. First, here's how I introduced Rosenberg to the threat posed by the Muslim Brotherhood and its stealthy civilization jihad during our first conversation by phone on December 1st, 2016.
The United States government introduced into evidence in the course of the largest terrorism financing trial in U.S. history a document called the Explanatory Memorandum on the General Strategic Goal of the Group in North America, which it was the government's position in the course of that trial amounted to a secret plan of the Muslim Brotherhood for, in its words, destroying Western civilization from within by their hands, meaning ours, and the hands of the believers, so that God's religion was made victorious over all other religions. Now, in a helpful addition to that strategic plan, the Brotherhood attached a list of 29 organizations under the heading, Our Organizations and Organizations of Our Friends. And that 29 group list, to this day, some 25 years after it was written, still represents the core of what we're told are the mainstream Muslim groups in America, the Muslim leadership, and the degree to which the Muslim Brotherhood owns and operates all of those groups, and now probably 1 or 2 orders of magnitude more that have come into being since 1991 that were not on that list, including, notably, the Council on American Islamic Relations, or CAIR. That's the cohort that we have been told has to be reached out to, engaged, accommodated, and enabled to be part of the policymaking process with respect to anything we do vis-a-vis the Muslim community in the United States. that is, in short, a formula for, people who have as their express purpose destroying us, using such opportunities to take us down. So that's a key set of facts that has yet to be rebutted by anybody. And it has been systematically ignored by the United States government since the Holy Land Foundation trial.
Here's my response to a question Rosenberg asked about Mr. Trump's national security advisor, Michael Flynn.
He's clearly been challenging some of the politically correct orthodoxy about national security in general, and specifically about, radical Islamic terrorism, as I think he calls it. I don't particularly care for that term because I don't think it really captures the problem, because what, as I said to you earlier, is a multifaceted threat, is bigger than terrorism. And while I think of it as radical, most people would, it is, according to the authorities of Islam, something that is part of its DNA, namely Sharia. There are clearly Muslims who don't believe that, and I think they are our natural allies, but there are others, by the probably hundreds of millions, who do believe that it's God's will that they pursue the imposition of Sharia worldwide through what other means. The violent jihad is clearly the most efficient and preferred, according to Muhammad's own experience. There's the hijra, the migration. There's the zakat, or what I think is probably in our lexicon described as material support for terrorism, at least in part. And then there's, of course, what the Muslim Brotherhood calls civilization jihad, the subversion, stealthy, not so much nonviolent, as we're often told it is, but pre-violent means of advancing the same ends. So, you put all that together, and it's more than just terrorism, for sure. And it is a problem that we need to think about afresh. And I think Mike has been doing a lot of that, and I commend him for that.
Note, I said, quote, "There are clearly Muslims who don't believe that, and I think they are our natural allies," unquote. In a subsequent in-person interview a week later, I discussed again the Muslim Brotherhood, its civilization jihad, and its explanatory memorandum. I told him I thought it
is the single most important book, as far as I'm concerned, on the subject, because it is a secret plan that the Muslim Brotherhood's leadership here in America wrote in 1991 as a report back to the mothership in Egypt. Never meant for our eyes, but it lays out both what their mission is, which is described as destroying Western civilization from within by their hands, meaning ours and the hands of the believers, so that God's religion is made victorious over all other religions. And then it proceeds to say, in the way of a report as to how they're coming, some 25 years after they began, with this stealthy, subversive kind of jihad, by which they essentially, like termites, hollow out, the structure of civil society and other institutions, government institutions included, for the purpose of creating conditions under which the jihad will succeed, perhaps through a violent phase, or perhaps otherwise.
I'm talking about the Muslim Brotherhood's role as being like termites as they pursue their civilization jihad. But Matt Rosenberg asserts I was describing Muslims and their faith. This is the more outrageous in light of the following question he put to me and my reply.
How big of a problem do you think this is? I mean, how many American Muslims do you think subscribe to this? I mean, anybody who tells you there's just no radicalism at all among any religious group is an idiot. They're total moron. That means they've never met a religious person in their life. I've known a lot of them. Some more than others. Right now, I think there are certainly Muslims out there who want to destroy the West. I'm not going to argue with that point. I know them. I've met a number of them. I personally haven't seen a lot of it in the U.S. I'll say that up front. So I'm predisposed to think law enforcement issue, let it be that and move on and not make too big a thing of it. But you seem to think it's a bigger problem, that there's more out there than I'm seeing or others are seeing.
Well, yeah, I do. What I'm saying, and I emphasize it at every opportunity, is there is some number of people. I have no idea what it is. I think it's a rather larger percentage here
than in lots of the hellholes you've been living in, who don't know from Sharia, or at least if they know about it, don't want to live under it, don't want to practice it themselves, certainly aren't about imposing it on other people. And I think that potentially, not just our friends, but they may be actually decisive to this outcome.
I have asked for the New York Times to retract their fake narrative that deliberately misstated my views, but it has yet to happen. It's stunts like this that have discredited the Times and alienated many of its readers. Stay tuned for more of Secure Freedom Radio.